I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, coming up on Football Today. If you ask some pundits, in the past, right back was an undesirable position.
Sometimes I look at fullbacks and I think there's only two things for a fullback. You're either a failed winger or a failed centre-back. Thanks for that. I was neither. Which were you? Just failed. You grew up as a centre-back, didn't you? I grew up as a centre-back, yeah. No one wants to be a fullback as a kid. No one wants to grow up and be a Gary Neville.
Now, some of the Premier League's best players play at right back.
Yeah, quite deceptive, isn't it, Tariq Lamptey? We know how quick he is, and we've seen that. And that's what he was. He just caught Bruno Fernandes out with his speed.
Tariq Lamptey has terrorized defences to start the season and has been drawing both penalties and praise all around England.
It really was a barnstorming performance, I thought, from Tariq Lamptey. He was absolutely everywhere.
He's setting the benchmark now. He really is leading the way.
Is he the best, Martin? Is he the best we've got?
I've not seen anyone in Europe so far this season play as well as he has in those two games. That is remarkable. I'm giggling watching the TV, what he's doing to people.
Today we profile Brighton's breakout star and explain why we're seeing better right backs than ever before.
Tariq Lamptey's had a scintillating start to the season for Brighton.
Andy Naylor covers Brighton and Hove Albion for The Athletic.
He's looked very good, in fact, ever since he broke into the side after the pandemic lockdown in June.
What has impressed you about his play so far?
Well, he's got pretty much everything you would like as a right back, or more to the point, the system Brighton are playing now, a right wing back, which he seems ideally suited for. He's got such phenomenal pace, adventure going forward. For a player of his age, tender years, 19, makes good decisions at the end of it, and defensively as well. Let's not forget that's what he is first and foremost in the position he plays. Just real determination, and we've seen both sides of his game so far, and both sides have been very impressive.
Ben White finding Lamptey. Sam Maximan getting back goal side for Newcastle to help out defensively, and he made that challenge there. The referee has a look and says penalty.
Are there any moments that stand out to you? I mean, I think everyone's been talking about the St. Maxima penalty where, I mean, he made St. Maximum look a little slow, honestly.
It's interesting, and I think in that Newcastle game, most of the noise, let's say, around Tariq so far has been what he does in an attacking sense. He's so exciting to watch, those bursting runs, the pace, the penalty that you've alluded to there. But there were actually two other incidents in the Newcastle game which I thought were really interesting in terms of the overall package you get with him. Early on, against the same player, St. Maximin, he used his body to shrug him off, just shrugged him off the ball. I mean, Tariq is only 5'4", but he makes the very most of what he's got.
Well, look at the strength here. Lovely strength that is, nice and confident, and then they have to bring him down. Got away with that one, Shelby. Could have maybe got more in the yellow.
And then there was another incident late in the first half, a recovery tackle on Callum Wilson, who was basically through one-on-one. Sliding tackle with his weaker left foot. Showed real courage in that moment, a clean tackle.
And this is probably the best moment for me, because he's a defender after all. Watch this for recovery. Decision making, yes, I can get there. He hurt himself doing that for the team.
So that demonstrated, like I said, we see a lot and hear a lot about the attacking side of his game, but he really has got the all-round attributes.
You mentioned his height. He's 5'4". He's probably the shortest player in the Premier League. In previous generations, that might have kind of disqualified him from being a right back or just playing at all. How does his height influence or limit his play, or does it?
If anything, certainly in an attacking sense, I think it's an advantage, that low centre of gravity. Let's look at somebody like Lionel Messi. I'm not suggesting, I'm not comparing Tariq with Lionel Messi, but you look at, in terms of stature, that low centre of gravity. Dan Burn, all right, Dan, who plays on the opposite side of the defence. His dad is 6'7", and he's mentioned to me about how in training he often finds himself marking Tariq, and it's an absolute nightmare to sort of keep tabs with him. Clearly, you know, in a defensive sense, it's really about a collective and, if you like, hiding what might be regarded as a weakness. So, you know, when it's defending corners, for example, it's up to other players to kind of be aware of the fact that Tariq will have a height disadvantage in that situation, and for him not to get isolated.
His energy, his quality,
his pace.
And attacking, he's white lightning in attack. He can do anything.
You know, much has been made about his speed, and we alluded to it earlier. You know, just how fast is he?
Well, according to figures in the latest round of Premier League matches at the weekend, top speed Tariq Lamptey was the quickest, 22.8 miles per hour. Now, just to put that into a bit of context, Jamal Lewis, Newcastle's new left-back from Norwich, he's certainly no slouch. He recorded a top speed just a little below that, 21.8 miles per hour. And yet in that game, in the first half, there was an incident where Jamal Lewis was trying to catch Tariq Lamptey and couldn't, and ended up fouling him and got a caution. If you look at the picture wider, in worldwide terms, if you like, pace-wise, he's right up there with the likes of Kylian Mbappe, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Leroy Sané, Mo Salah. So he is very quick, very quick. And I wrote a piece on the eve of the season, went back to his school, Queensmead School in Ruislip, West London, spoke to a couple of his teachers. That speed dates right back to his school days. He was phenomenally quick then as well.
You mentioned in an article this past week that he was almost taken off at halftime due to some knocks from some heavy challenges. Is that kind of the biggest concern actually with his size? You know, how small his frame will, you know, handle the wear and tear of the Premier League?
Well, I do think Steve Bruce alluded to it, the Newcastle manager, in his post-match press conference. He said that they were aware of him.
I was absolutely fantastic, and we knew all about him. We knew all about him when we knew Alan would have a handful. You know, we knew that the kid bombs forward, he wants to get forward, and we struggled against him.
And I think opponents have very quickly become aware of Tariq Lamptey and the damage he can do to them in an attacking sense. So I do think he's going to become a bit of a marked man, if you like. Not in a sense that people will necessarily go out to stop him by foul means, but I think it's that speed that we've talked about, that pace with and without the ball. What it actually means is when players go to challenge him and attempt to get the ball off him, they think they're going to get there, but they just don't. They're just not quick enough. He's gone. So I think he will. He is going to get fouled. He has been already. He is going to get fouled a lot, probably a few knocks. But character-wise, I think he's, from everything I'm told by people who know him well, he doesn't strike me as the kind of character who will let that stop him. I mean, Graham Potter mentioned they were thinking about changing him at half-time, but he certainly wanted to carry on then before he eventually got replaced in the 58th minute.
I want to go back in time a little bit. You know, he came to Brighton in January, but before then he was at Chelsea, you know, and much like a lot of Chelsea youngsters, you know, he wasn't sure what to do. Can you kind of explain his situation back in January, what options were available to him and why he ended up choosing Brighton?
Well, let's bear in mind, you know, he'd been at Chelsea since the age of 7, gone right the way through. And if we look at the situation in the end of last year, the final game of 2019 for Chelsea at Arsenal, Frank Lampard gave him his Premier League debut as a substitute, and he helped turn the game around, made an impact. They were 2-1 down, ended up winning the game 2-1.
So Tariq, talk us through it. Frank's got his arm around you on the touchline, right where we are now. What were you thinking? What were you feeling?
My heart was racing. I was thinking, this is the moment me and my family have been waiting for a very long time. Everyone knows I joined the club since the age of 8, and then Franco just said to me that, like, just be you, play your normal game and go out and enjoy it.
And you did? didn't put a foot wrong as a right back. It wasn't even a wing back, and you actually created one of the first chances we had in that second half for Tammy there. So was that what you were thinking? I'm just got to do what I do.
Yeah, and then that I've waited a long time for my debut, and I'm just grateful for the coach for giving me this chance and everyone that helped me. And I just thought, you know, I'm out here. Don't be afraid of anything. Just play my natural game, and everything will come to it.
He was already firmly in Brighton's sights by then. The club's technical director, Dan Ashworth, knew of him very well from his time in the same role at the FA. Tariq has represented England under 18s, under 19s, under 20s, and has just made his England under 21s debut as well. So Brighton were very much aware of his situation, knew that he was out of contract. And the key thing was at Chelsea, when Tariq Lamptey looked ahead at his first team opportunities, he saw in the way not only the club captain Cesar Azpilicueta, but also Reece James, who of course has recently made his England debut. So he couldn't see a pathway. At Brighton, there was a clear pathway for him to be playing in the Premier League immediately. And if they trapped him, he liked everything about the club. There were others interested: Wolves, Crystal Palace in France, PSG, Lille, Nice. But he's made the decision to join Brighton, and it looks a very good one so far.
Now, with all the clauses and things associated with the fee, it's around £3 million. Did they expect him to be this good this quickly?
Well, all I can say is for that sort of money, that does represent, on what we've seen so far, a fantastic piece of business. I think you can pretty rapidly stick a naught on that fee in terms of his value. So clearly they recognised his potential. Whether they thought he would make quite the sort of sensational impact he has already within 10 games, it's hard to say that they would have predicted that. But they were well aware of his capabilities, I think.
Yeah, I think he might be the best pound for pound and also the other best pound for pound player in the Premier League right now.
I think that's true on both counts.
You mentioned his personality earlier. What do people around the club say about his personality? Does he have a nickname of any sort?
Not aware of a nickname, but everyone we've spoken to about him at The Athletic, from the aforementioned teachers, Graham Potter, Bruno Salter, the former club captain, himself a very fine right back, so that's really good for Tariq in terms of his development. They all flag the fact that he is such a humble and nice young man. So that comes across from everyone you speak to. Graham Potter made a point of it when I asked him about that after the Newcastle game. So I think, he comes from a very good family. His father, Ahmed, has a lot to do with sort of steering his career. So there's nobody we could find has got a bad word to say against Tariq at all in terms of that side of his character and personality.
Dani Alves as well, being a fullback, he loved bombing down the right, and yeah, that's a bit of me as well.
In your piece, you mentioned his admiration for Dani Alves and Sir Alex Ferguson. What did you make of his feelings towards them? I thought they were interesting.
Well, I think they're interesting because in a kind of way, it sums up two key aspects of him. If you look at Dani Alves in terms of the type of player and the type of player Tariq is, and then you look at Sir Alex Ferguson and that determination, that will to win. And you can see that in Tariq as well when he's on the pitch. He's really got that desire and hunger. So in some ways, it's not surprising that those characters, for different reasons, are people he looked up to.
Have you heard any stories that kind of personify him as a person that you could share?
Well, it was interesting when I spoke to his school teachers back at Queensmead. He's got a younger brother who's on Watford's books, and he apparently has sometimes picked his younger brother up from school. He's always very polite, always, still very cordial, wasn't driving a flash car. So, he kind of values those relationships that he's had, and recognises this is not a sort of kid who's, I don't think, is going to get carried away or distracted by the scrutiny on him.
This week, striker Neil Maupay said, quote, "This kid doesn't have limits. He is 19 and playing at such a high level." What do you think his potential is? Could we see Brighton use him kind of like how Liverpool uses Trent Alexander-Arnold and have him be like a main focus of attack or, run things through the right?
Well, I think there's two things to this. His potential has no bounds. We must bear in mind, he's only 19, he's only played 10 games in the Premier League. There will be some bumps along the journey, along his pathway. There are for every player. We've kind of spoken a little bit about one, possibility of injuries perhaps. But for Tariq, I look at the pathway he's on, I look at the pathway he's on for his country, and as I said, the fact he's already made at 19 his debut for the under-23s. All things being equal, I'd be amazed, frankly, if he doesn't go on to represent England at senior level at some stage. I don't think that is a matter of if, it's more a matter of when.
Are you a fan of football today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode. We just profiled Tariq Lamptey with Brighton beat reporter Andy Naylor, and I saw a recent tweet of yours, and you mentioned your love of Lamptey. What about him has made you fall head over heels for him?
I think the most attractive qualities in any young player are their confidence and maturity.
Daniel Storey is a freelance journalist whose work can be found in the iPaper, BBC Sport, and the Totally Football Show, amongst others.
Making the right decisions of when to pass and when to overlap and when you need to track back and when you should take on your man. And, I think Lamptey, as many others in the Premier League, looks to have all the characteristics of a modern fullback. And quite frankly, that's why he's in the team already. His speed, his dribbling and positioning. But it's the decision-making and that confidence that fine-tunes all those tactical aspects, I guess, of the game, and that seems to really stick out with him. He seems to be a young man who is taking very large steps forward very quickly and very easily too.
As we know, he's not the only young blossoming right back right now. There are plenty of others in the Premier League as well. Is this a golden age for the right back position?
I think it kind of reflects a change in the fullback position as a whole. And it stands to reason that because, I looked it up and around 12% of people are left-footed and are therefore more likely to be left-back. Left-back seems a more specialist position than right-back. So I think that necessarily, if you are producing more fullbacks in general, it kind of dictates that you will probably have more right-backs than left-backs. And we certainly have got, an extremely good crop. England has never been better suited with options, to my mind. And I think importantly has never been better blessed with young multifunctional right backs. Right backs that you would be confident of playing pretty much anywhere in the team, which is both really exciting and also kind of infuriating because England are not particularly well stocked with left backs.
But as we know, it's not just England that we're kind of seeing this rise in the right back position or just fullbacks in general. Alphonso Davies, had a huge breakthrough season for Bayern, and they spent 100 million on Benjamin Pavard and Lucas Hernandez. And over the last 2 years, Dortmund have relied heavily on their fullbacks and Rafael Guerreiro and Hakimi. And speaking of Hakimi, he was sold for £40 million to Inter from Real Madrid this summer. Do you think clubs are starting to value the position a little bit more?
I think it probably reflects a change in the position. No longer is the fullback a defensive area of the team. Gary Neville spoke last year about his honesty that he would have really struggled to be a right back in the Premier League in 2020, even if he was 25 years old, because his style in football as it was at that time was was as a facilitator in an attacking system. Get the ball, win the ball, pass it to someone who can do something with it. That's been completely turned on its head. It's become an attacking weapon that I think has been transformed by a few things. The rise in counter-attacking football. I think the rise in multifunctional wingers who kind of play as wide forwards and therefore drift in field to create space for overlaps, and also the rise in pressing, because successful pressing works not only when you win possession height of the pitch, but when you have then created an overload in which to exploit that. And you look at that, and arguably fullbacks are the most important players in the team now. And if you are the most important player in a team, arguably, then your value is only going to increase, and the better players in those positions are only ever going to move for more money. I think partly there's the increase in three at the back and the use of wing backs is a kind of modern thing, or a modern rejuvenation of that. But now a right back or a left back effectively has the full flank for their own. So they need the stamina to get back, and they're doing that. The players that we see in those positions are completely multifunctional footballers.
You said they have like kind of their whole flank to themselves. Do you think that players are wanting to play in that position more because they do have the whole flank to themselves and they do have a bit more space than they might have before?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's the result leading the method or the method leading the result, because fullbacks generally are probably the most versatile players in the team. We've seen Kyle Walker shift to centre-back. We've seen Trent Alexander-Arnold be talked about as a central midfielder. We've seen players converted into wingers from fullback, or certainly become more attacking players. So I think we've probably created that by design. The rise in technical coaching, particularly in England, was long overdue. I think we trailed the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And I think the reaction to that has created a number of players who see fullback as a first choice option. But not only that, they see it as a means to learn the game in a way that can make them incredibly versatile, so that they're very attractive to managers because they can fill in at centre-back, they can play in central midfield if needs must. So yeah, I mean, if I was a kid looking to be a footballer now, the kind of cliche was that the fullbacks were always picked last on school teams. I'm not sure that's true anymore.
When do you think this really started to take place? Like, when did this transformation at the position happen, or evolution at the position happen?
Well, I think we probably have to go back to the 1970s and the principles of total football within the Dutch setup. And even that it was a huge innovation, but it wasn't the original. But they created players, or they taught this philosophy of players that was comfortable in every position on the pitch. So fullback wasn't necessarily a specialist position, but one that kind of derived from other positions on the pitch. It had the passing of a central midfielder, the speed and dribbling of a winger. And then if we fast forward to the 90s, the pair of fullbacks that stick out to my mind, and I'm a child of the 90s, are Roberto Carlos and Cafu with Brazil, who they almost felt like a cheat code because they were so different to other countries. They were viewed in an attacking sense. They overlapped, they got forward, but they didn't necessarily have any deficiencies in their defending. And I think those characteristics were successful. And I think those characteristics spoke to a new crop of managers that felt that they could use their fullbacks in a different way than they've ever been used before. And, football is cyclical, but football moves forward. And if fullbacks were not being utilised to their full ability, it created this potential within coaching systems to revolutionise what they did.
If we look a little bit more modern, even than that, do you think that Trent and Liverpool kind of launched this, that people saw, oh, hey, Liverpool's been really successful with this, maybe we should lean into this? Or is that just kind of reaching for the most obvious answer?
I think Jurgen Klopp has taken them on to a new level by bringing something new, which is not just the attacking fullback getting forward and crossing, but the pair of fullbacks as a duo. I don't think we'd really seen that before. Both of them pushing up and the switches in play from one wing to the other.
Vision by Alexander-Arnold, whips the ball with his left foot to Robertson. The cross goes in. This is dangerous. Salah! Oh goodness me! Devastating counter-attacking football by Liverpool.
That kind of attacking move, I think, is pretty innovative, and Klopp deserves huge credit for that. I don't know if it's easily replicable, because I think Liverpool have a very exact way of playing that is very hard to replicate, and it partly it's based on Jurgen Klopp as a man as well as a manager in terms of what he demands from his players. But they are certainly at the forefront now, I think. I think they are probably the best pair of fullbacks in the world. And to reiterate what I've said, they are a pair, very much so. If one doesn't play, the other suffers. We didn't really see that before, I don't think.
What do you think are some consequences or potential consequences of this evolution? What might we see more of as a result of this or less of?
I think we will see more players converting to fullback who maybe wingers or central midfielders. You've got, to my mind, the rise of the multifunctional footballer. It's a phrase I've used plenty of times already, but has grown in leaps and bounds. It's no longer that, we can stick the centre-back up front for the last 10 minutes because he's good at heading. We've got players like Joshua Kimmich and, David Alaba who could very feasibly be on a team sheet and play in 3 or 4 positions, and we don't know. That still, I think, is quite alien in English football. I think when we see a team sheet, we pretty much know where everyone's going to play. And I wonder if that might lead to our notion of formation and team shape having to be slightly rewritten, because it raises the idea of a team as one kind of melting pot, one whirligig formation where players turn up in different positions and higher up the pitch than we've ever expected before. So we don't just have a defensive line, a midfield line and the forwards. We have players dropping into different positions between the lines. And kind of tactically, that's really exciting because that creates it creates a lack of expectation. It creates a surprise. And I think when we watch football, what we're looking for is a surprise. We like to see brilliant players doing brilliant things, but if they can really take us outside of our expectations when we watch so much football, that to me is really exciting.
You mentioned Gary Neville earlier, and I think something that's quite remarkable that I've noticed is just the speed of these players. At this point, it seems like you virtually need to be an Olympic sprinter to kind of play down the wings. Otherwise, players like Lamptey or Dama Traore or Aaron Wan-Bissaka or plenty others are just going to kind of run right past you.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, I think that's an indirect result of the rise in pressing, because pressing football is sold as a very simple concept, which is, pressure the opponent high up the pitch, force turnovers, and the coaches that have it as a philosophy believe that you are at your most dangerous within 2 or 3 seconds of winning back the ball. But in order for that to be successful, you need to have those overlaps. And I think with the wide forwards tucking in, fullbacks increasingly become that overlap option. And if that's going to work, every time you press the ball, you don't necessarily win it back. So as soon as your press is bypassed, those fullbacks then have to get back into position. Some can do it with, positional ability or an ability to read the game 2 or 3 moves ahead and maybe spot that they shouldn't go forward. But most of them do it through recovery pace. And if we talk about the fullbacks in the Premier League at the moment, the young ones, we are talking about Lamptey and Alexander-Arnold and Reece James, who have this incredible recovery pace. I always remember when Micah Richards came through at Manchester City, the big thing that everyone was surprised about was just how quickly he got back into position. So he made mistakes. He got caught out of position, but his speed and stamina to do it repeatedly over the game was enough that he could counteract that weakness. And that's what we're seeing more now. I think we're seeing that a fullback can offer so much more in the attacking third that if they've got the pace to get back, to use a phrase I've already used, it almost feels like a cheat card. It feels like there's very few ways to kind of thwart it.
You put out a tweet recently where you made a first 11 just full of right backs in the Premier League. And I'm just curious, which of them do you see as kind of the most promising or the best going forward?
I think going forward, Tariq Lamptey looks brilliant. I think defensively, Aaron Wan-Bissaka is the most solid defensively, but there is an argument that he is slightly one-dimensional, and that even though it's only a year and a bit since Manchester United paid so much money for him, he isn't as attacking as some supporters and some right-backs in other teams, and therefore they might like. But in terms of the most complete, it has to be Trent Alexander-Arnold. We so easily forget that he's still 21 years old, and that's because he has already surpassed the expectation and the peak that we might normally expect from a career right back, not just a young right back. He really could be one of the best fullbacks in the world if he isn't already. So at 21, that kind of potential is absolutely frightening. The only handbrake I'd put on all those I've mentioned is that they are all young, and fullback has been seen as a defensive position, and therefore you peak or you can peak into your 30s. It's going to be really interesting to see whether some of these young players, playing so young, being so vibrant and expected to run so much, whether the peak age of fullbacks drops significantly. Because I think with players like Kyle Walker and Kieran Trippier, we maybe are seeing a sense of that already.
That's actually really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before, that the average age to be in one of these positions is going to drop. So like what happens when these guys turn like 28, 29, 30 and maybe don't have the legs anymore, or, 31, like, what are they going to do?
You look at players who got into the PFA Team of the Year in the mid or early 90s through to the mid 2000s, and it's players like Branislav Ivanovic, it's Gary Neville was still getting them late on, Gary Kelly was getting into them. They were not necessarily young at that point, and they certainly weren't quick players. So the wear on the body, clearly, nutrition and sports science and coaching and fitness coaching have all improved ginormously to counteract any doubts about that. But it will be really interesting to see if they can cope.
I saw a quote recently from Graham Potter that said, "We go through those little stages and I'm pretty sure it will turn back at some point." Do you think that this rise in the quality and the importance of fullbacks, and specifically the right back position, is a short-term fad, or are we going to see this as like a longer lasting trend?
I think there's probably two answers there. The first is that I don't think we will return to defensive fullbacks. Just as with the kind of decline of the popularity of tiki-taka and possession football, that hasn't signalled the end of the passing midfielder, because they are still a crucial part of the team. And I think having two facets or having two strings to your bow will always be better than just having one. We might see a rise in players that can do everything, that can attack and defend as well. And it might be that the next generation of coaches looks at producing those complete defender-attacker fullbacks. And but I really don't see a return to single function footballers. We don't have goalkeepers that are just shot stoppers anymore. We don't have defenders that can, or very few defenders that can just head the ball. We don't have a centre forward that can just win it in the air and hold it up. Players are expected to do more now because, the rise in fitness dictates, and the huge network of scouting dictates, that nothing slips through the net anymore. So if you can do more, you will be more successful. But I do agree with Graham Potter that there'll be a response to thwart teams. It might not be successful, but football has always been, and football tactics have always come in cycles. People may look at, how can we beat this press? If the fullback's high and they're pressing high, do we look direct into our wide forwards and tell them to split out wide to pick up possession? There will always be changes like that. I don't think there will be revolutions. These things tend to go by like the tide, but there will always be a plan to thwart it. I think the principal reason that Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool have bought Thiago Alcantara is because he is wary that everyone knows how important Andrew Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold were last season, and therefore, if we shut them down, can we shut Liverpool down? So the best coaches and the best clubs will always try and treat it like a game of chess and work out 3 moves ahead what their opponent is trying to do to them. And that is what, to my mind, makes football absolutely fascinating.
Andy Naylor covers Brighton and Hove Albion for The Athletic, and that is where you can read his recent profile on Tariq Lamptey. Daniel Storey is a freelance journalist whose work can be found in The iPaper, BBC Sport, and The Totally Football Show, amongst others. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those music tracks in our episode description. This episode was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And before you go, if you're a fan of the show and would like to support us, please sign up to our Patreon page, where you'll get access to bonus episodes and extra content. And if you can't spare the cash, please tell a friend instead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.